Hello everybody and welcome to the Mainstream Indie Music channel. This video was a long time in the making. There's already a video that we have on this channel that is about the Talking Heads lead frontman, and REM also kind of came to my head. Now, I know at first glance, just like David Byrne, as I mentioned earlier, you have Michael Stipe, who's kind of just like the brains, the front man of REM, right? And again, I know what you're thinking. You might be wondering to yourself, well, would you really classify REM as a an indie band? And that I do kind of hesitate because no, definitely if you especially, pin them up against some indie bands that I've talked about even on this channel that I still have kind of in the cards coming up in the future. No, REM isn't. I mean, hey, they got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, right? However, indie itself, especially the indie bands from the early 2000s, you really have to remember had got set up by a lot of different bands leading up to that explosion that happened, also because of the internet, fusing kind of with music in that time as well. And so to me, Michael Stipe, REM, has always kind of been on my list of, even though I wouldn't consider them quite indie, it would just feel odd to not mention the work that they contributed to the alternative and indie scene. You could kind of see them as one of the early pioneers, whether it's the distinct kind of singing style that Michael brought and the artwork that he kind of infused, not only in the music, but also with the music videos, the creativity of the band. He brought all of it. And to me, REM is really just a big leader in kind of founding the work of alternative from the early 2000s. Now, Michael himself was pretty interesting, and well, not was, he's still alive, is an interesting character in himself, in that he was an army brat growing up. He moved around constantly. He even lived out of the United States for a period of time. You can imagine just moving constantly. And it seems like to kind of combat that loneliness, to kind of combat having to uproot himself all the time, he really busied himself and buried himself into music. And it wasn't really the main hits of the day that he got into. He said one of his biggest influences was a Patti Smith album. But even when REM was formed, a lot of the band members decided to kind of give him a chance to be the lead singer because they said, well, he was very obscure in his music tastes, And I think that's kind of where I kind of lump REM in to this kind of indie alternative crowd because, again, they weren't interested in really kind of fitting the mainstream narrative. They like to kind of paint themselves with different colored strokes, I guess you could say. They got together, though, as many of our bands do, as we talk about on this channel, in college. And all four band members dropped out of college to make their dreams happen. Michael was, interestingly, one of the last people and the youngest person to be in the group. However, they hit instant success immediately because their debut album was called Murmur, and that debut album was so big and was so beloved by critics and fans alike that it actually won not a major award, but I believe it was like a Rolling Stone magazine's poll of Best Album of the Year. They beat Thriller during that period of time. So yeah, REM already right off the bat was beloved by people. And of course, it made sense to just go right along into the second album. It's interesting to note, though, that REM and especially Michael had a very difficult time because after their second album, which was released literally the year after their debut album, they, of course, went on to tour and make their third album together. However, that recording, even though it was well received by its fans, was different. The third album kind of tended to be a lot more experimental and even a little leaning into kind of like folk music. I'm sorry. And because of that, and maybe just because of the stress of constantly touring, of constantly being on the road, Michael himself started to suffer a lot during that period of time. Fans noticed a huge change in how he looked. He looked very different, shaving his head. His weight changed a lot during that period of time, too. But that kind of led right into the second half of his and REM's career, which is kind of like the 90s themselves. Can you imagine during that time, they are battling, a complete change in direction of music itself. Back in the 90s, hip hop started to become bigger and bigger. Grunge, of course, started to become huge during that period of time. And then punk music or punk rock music also started to become big during that time. Through all that, REM is still going. They are still releasing music. And again, like I said, uh, that's when like the Green album was released. Losing My Religion was out during that time. And, they just continued to crank out major hits, even during the change in the music kind of atmosphere happening around them. During the kind of the last stretch of REM being a band, they did lose one member who quit on amicable terms. It wasn't bad. It was due to health reasons, and Michael and the group continued to keep going, but only for a short period of time. REM disbanded as a band, and they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as they belong. Now, Michael himself is a very interesting character. A lot of people question his own sexuality, where he leans. He does have a live-in partner, and he also has been seen with women. He has been seen with men as well. Especially, you imagine during the time of kind of the HIV/AIDS during the late 80s and early 90s, Michael himself was questioned about that and kind of was brought into that group of musicians. And he constantly is busy in music projects. Interestingly, kind of siding himself with a lot of fellow musicians like Coldplay, like other alternative bands. All the way until this day, he stays busy musically. And that's kind of the short story of Michael Stipe and REM. Really, like I said, maybe not the first indie band that you think of, but I think they contributed very much to the scene that we know and love today. What do you think? Let me know, and I'll see y'all next week.